Metropolis by Thea Von Harbou. Part 13. Father. Joe Fredison's son knew quite well that his father could not hear him, for he, the son, was standing in the lowest part of the pedestal of the new Tower of Babel, whither the twitching pulse of the street had thrown him, and his father was high, high above the boiling of the city, the untouched brain, in the cool brain pan. But yet he shouted for him and had to shout, and his shout itself was a cry for help and accusation. The round structure of the new Tower of Babel was throwing up people who pushed out into the street, laughing as if insane. They were sucked up by the pulp of those in the street. The new Tower of Babel was deserted. Those who had occupied its rooms and passages, those who had been poured by the buckets of the Paternoster works down to the depths, up to the heights, who had taken up their positions on the stairs, who had received instructions and passed them on, who had suffocated amidst figures, who had listened into the whispers of the world, all streamed out from the new Tower of Babel as blood streams out from a cut vein, until it stood there, horribly empty, bled white. But the machines went on living. Yes, they seemed to be coming to life for the first time. Freda, who stood a crumb of humanity alone in the hugeness of the round structure, heard the soft, deep, rushing howl, like the breath of the new Tower of Babel, growing louder and louder, clearer and clearer. And he saw, on turning round, that the empty cells of the Paternoster were speeding more and more rapidly, more and more hurriedly upwards and downwards. Yes, now it was as if these cells, these empty cells, were dancing upward and downwards, and the howling which transected the new Tower of Babel seemed to proceed from out their empty jaws. "Father!" shouted Freda, and the whole round structure roared with him, with all its lungs. Freda ran, but not to the heights of the tower. He ran to the depths, driven by horror and curiosity, down into the hell, guided by luminous pillars to the abode of the Paternoster machine, which was like Ganesha, the god with the elephant's head. The luminous pillars by which he ran did not shine as usual with their white icy light. They blinked, they flashed lightning, they flickered, they burnt with evil green light. The stones over which he ran swayed like water. The nearer he came to the machine room, the more bellowing did the voice of the tower become. The walls were baking, the air was colourless fire. If the door had not burst open by itself, no human hand could have opened it, for it was like a glowing curtain of liquid steel. Freda held his arm flung before his forehead, as if wishing to protect his brain from bursting. His eyes sought the machine in front of which he had once stood. It was crouching in the centre of the howling room. It shone with oil. It had gleaming limbs. Under the crouching body and the head, which was sunken on its chest, crooked legs rested, gnome-like, upon the platform. The trunk and legs were motionless, but the short arms pushed and pushed and pushed, alternatively forwards, backwards, forwards. And the machine was quite abandoned. Nobody was watching it. Nobody's hand held the lever. Nobody's gaze was fixed on the clock, the hands of which chased through the grades as though gone mad. "Father!" shouted Freda, about to hurl himself forward, but at the same moment it was as if the hunched-up body of the wild machine, which was like Ganesha, raised itself up to a furious height, as though its legs stretched themselves upon stumpy feet to make a murderous leap, as though its arms no longer stretched themselves to push. No, to seize, to crush, as though the howling voice of the new Tower of Babel broke from the lungs of the Paternoster machine, alone howling, "Murder!" and howling unceasingly, "Murder!" The flame curtain of the door flew sideways, whistling. The monster machine rolled itself down from the platform with pushing arms. The whole structure of the new Tower of Babel quivered. The walls shook. The ceiling groaned. Fred had turned round. He threw his arms about his neck and ran. He saw the luminous pillars stabbing at him. He heard a rattling gasp at his back and felt the marrow dry up and ran and ran. He ran towards doors, pushed them open, slammed them to behind them, and raced onwards. "Father?" he shouted, and with a feeling as if his brain were overturning. "Our Father, which art in heaven." Upstairs. Where did these stairs lead to? Doors thundered open, rebounding against the walls. Ah, the temple of the machine rooms. Deities, the machines, the shining lords, the god machines of Metropolis. All the great gods were living in white temples. Baal and Moloch and Huitzilopochtli and Durga. Some frightfully companionable, some terribly solitary. There, Juggernaut's divine car. There, the towers of silence. There, Mahomet's carved sword. There, the crosses of Golgotha. And not a soul in the white rooms. The machines, these god machines, left terribly alone. And they were all living. Yes, they were really living an enhanced and inflamed life. For Metropolis had a brain. Metropolis had a heart. The heart of the machine city of Metropolis dwelt in a white cathedral-like building. The heart of the machine city of Metropolis was, until this day and this hour, guarded by one single man. The heart of the machine city of Metropolis was a machine and a universe to itself. Above the deep mysteries of its delicate joints, like the sun's disk, like the halo of a divine being, stood the silver spinning wheel, the spokes of which appeared in the whirl of revolution as a single gleaming disk. No machine in all Metropolis which did not receive its power from this heart. One single lever controlled this marvel of steel. With the lever set to safety, all the machines would play with their curbed power, like tame animals. The shimmering spokes of the sun wheel would circle, clearly to be distinguished above the heart machine. With the lever set to 6, and it was generally set there, then work would spell slavery. The machines would roar, the powerful wheel of the heart machine would hang, an apparently motionless mirror of brightest silver above it, and the mighty thunder of the machines, produced by the heartbeat of this one, would arch itself, a second heaven, above Metropolis, Joe Fredison's city. But never, as yet, since the construction of Metropolis, had the lever been set to 12. Now it was set to 12. Now the lever was set to 12. A girl's hand, more delicate than glass, had pressed around the weighty lever, which was set to safety until it touched 12. The heart of Metropolis, Joe Fredison's great city, had begun to run up a temperature, seized by a deadly illness, chasing the red waves of its fever along to all the machines which were fed by its pulse. No machine in all Metropolis which did not receive its power from this heart. Then all the god machines were taken with the fever. From the towers of silence there broke forth the vapour of decomposition. Blue frames hovered in the space above them, and the towers, the huge towers which used otherwise to turn about but once in the course of the day, tottered around on their pedestals in a drunken spinning dance, full to bursting point. Mahomet's curved sword was a circular lightning in the air. It met with no resistance. It cut and cut. It grew angry because it had nothing to cut. The power which squandered too uselessly was still increasing, now gathered itself together and hissing, sent out snakes, green hissing snakes in all directions. From the projecting arms of the crosses of Golgotha there swept long, white, crackling springs of sparks. Swaying under impacts which had shaken the earth itself, the unslain, the man-crushing car of Juggernaut began to glide began to roll, checked itself, hanging crookedly on the platform, trembled like a ship perishing on the rocks, lashed by the breakers, and shook itself free amidst groans. Then from their glittering thrones, Baal and Moloch, Huitzilopochtli, and Durga rose. All the god machines got up, stretching their limbs in a fearful liberty. Huitzilopochtli struggled from the jewel surface. Durga moved 8 murderous arms, crackling the while. Hungry fires smouldered up from the bellies of Baal and Moloch, licking out of their jaws, and a roaring like a herd of 1,000 buffaloes at being cheated of a purpose. Asa, Thor, swung the infallible hammer. A lost grain of dust among the souls of the gods, Freda reeled his way through the white rooms, the roaring temples. "Father!" he shouted, and he heard the voice of his father. "Yes, here I am. What do you want? Come here to me." "Where are you?" "Here." "But I can't see you. You must look higher." Freda's gaze flitted through the room. He saw his father standing on a platform between the outstretched arms of the crosses of Golgotha, from the ends of which long, white, crackling sprigs of sparks blazed. In the hellish fires, his father's face was a mask of unmistakable coldness. His eyes were blue gleaming steel amidst the great raving machine gods. He was a greater god and lord of it all. Freda ran over to him, but he could not get up to him. He clung to the foot of the flaming cross. Wild impacts crashed through the new Tower of Babel. "Father!" shrieked Freda, "your city is going to ruin!" Joe Fredison did not answer. The sweeping sprigs of flame seemed to be breaking from his temples. "Father, don't you understand? Your city is going to ruin. Your machines have come to life. They're dashing the town to pieces. They're tearing Metropolis to tatters. Do you hear? Explosion after explosion. I have seen in a street in which the houses were dancing upon their shattered foundations, just like little children dancing upon the stomach of a laughing giant. A lava stream of glowing copper poured itself out from the split-open tower of your boiler factory, and a naked man was running before it, a man whose hair was charred and who was roaring, 'The end of the world has come!' But he stumbled and the copper stream overtook him. Where the Jethro works stood, there is a hole in the earth which is filling up with water. Iron bridges are hanging in shreds between towers which have lost their entrails. Cranes are dangling on gallows like men hanged. And the people, incapable of flight or as of resistance, are wandering among our houses and streets, both of which seem doomed." He clasped his hands about the stem of the cross and threw his head back onto his neck to see his father quite clearly, quite openly in the face. "I cannot believe, Father, that there is anything mightier than you. I have cursed your overwhelming might which has filled me with horror from the bottom of my heart. Now I run to you and I ask you on my knees, why do you allow death to lay hands on the city which is yours?" "Because death has come upon the city by my will." "By your will?" "Yes." "The city is to perish?" "Don't you know why, Freda?" There was no answer. "The city is to go to ruin that you may build it up again." "I?" "You." "Then you are laying the murder of the city on my shoulders?" "The murder of the city reposes on the shoulders of those alone who trampled Grot, the guard of the heart machine, to death." "Did that also take place by your will, Father?" "Yes." "Then you forced them to commit the crime?" "For your sake, Freda, that you could redeem them." "And what about those, Father, who must die with your dying city before I can redeem them. Concern yourself about the living, Freda, not about the dead. And if the living come to kill you, that will not happen, Freda. That will not happen. The way to me among the raving god machines, as you called them, could only be found by one, and he found it. That was my son. Freda dropped his head into his hands. He rocked to and fro as if in pain. He moaned softly. He was about to speak, but before he could speak, a sound ripped the air, which sounded as though the earth were bursting to pieces. For a moment, everything in the white room seemed to hover in space a foot above the ground. Even Moloch and Baal and Huitzilopochtli and Durga, even the hammer of Asa Thor and the towers of silence. The crosses of Golgotha from the ends of the beams, of which long white crackling sprigs of sparks were blazing, fell together and then straightened up again. Then everything crashed back into its place with furious emphasis. Then all the lights went out, and from the depths and distance the city howled. "Father!" shouted Freda. "Yes, here I am. What do you want?" "I want you to put an end to this nightmare." "Now?" "Now." "But I don't want any more people to suffer. You must help them. You must save them, Father. You must save them. Now. Immediately." "Now? No." "Then," said Freda, pushing his fists out far before him, as if pushing something away from him, "then I must seek out the man who can help me, even if he is your enemy and mine." "Do you mean Orot Wang?" No answer. Joe Fredison continued, "Rotwang cannot help you." "Why not?" "He is dead." Silence. Then, tentatively, a strangled voice which asked, "Dead?" "Yes." "How did he come so suddenly to die?" "He died chiefly, Freda, because he dared to stretch out his hand towards the girl whom you love." Trembling fingers fumbled up the stem of the cross. "Maria, Father? Maria?" "So he called her." "Maria was with him in his house?" "Yes, Freda." "Ah, I see. And now?" "I do not know." Silence. "Freda?" No answer came. "Freda?" But a shadow ran past the windows of the white machine cathedral. It ran, ducked down, hands thrown behind its neck, as if it feared that Durga's arms could snatch at it, or that Asa Thor could hurl his hammer, which never failed, at it from behind in order, at Joe Fredison's command, to prevent its flight. It did not penetrate into the consciousness of the fugitive that all the machines were standing still because the heart, the unguarded heart of Metropolis, under the fiery lash of the 12, had raced itself to death. Maria felt something licking at her feet, like the tongue of a great gentle dog. She bent down to fumble for the animal's head, and felt that it was water into which she was groping. From where did the water come? It came silently, it did not splash, neither did it throw up waves, it just rose unhurriedly yet persistently. It was not colder than the air round about. It lapped about Maria's ankles. She snatched her feet back. She sat, crouched down, trembling, listening for the water which could not be heard. From where did it come? It was said that a river wound its way deep under the city. Joe Fredison had walled up its course when he built the subterranean city, the wonder of the world for the workmen of Metropolis. It was also said that the stream fed a mighty water basin and that there were pump works there, which were powerful enough inside of less than 10 hours either completely to empty or fill the water basin, in which there was a room for medium-sized city. One thing was certain, that in the subterranean workman's city, the throbbing of these pumps was constantly to be heard, as a soft, incessant pulse beat, if one laid one's head against a wall, and that, if this pulse beat should ever become silent, no other interpretation would be conceivable than that the pumps had stopped, and that then the river was rising. But they had never stopped. And now? From where was the silent water coming? Was it still rising? She bent forward. She did not have to stretch her hand down very low to touch the cool brow of the water. Now she felt too that it was flowing. It was making its way with great certainty of aim in one direction. It was making its way towards the subterranean city. Old books tell of saintly women whose smile at the moment of preparing themselves to gain the martyr's crown was of such sweetness that the torturers fell at their feet and hardened heathens praised the name of God. But Maria's smile was perhaps of a still sweeter kind, for when, setting about her race with the silent water, she thought not of the crown of eternal bliss, but only of death and of the man she loved. Yes, now the water seemed horribly cold as her slender feet dipped down into it and murmured as she ran along through it. It soaked itself into the hem of her dress, clinging tight and making progress more and more difficult. But that was not the worst. The worst was that the water had also begun to have a voice. The water quoth, "Do you know, beautiful Maria, that I am fleeter than the fleetest foot? I am stroking your sweet ankles. I shall soon clutch at your knees. No one has ever embraced your tender hips, but I shall do so, and before your steps number 1,000 more, and I do not know, beautiful Maria, if you will reach your destination before you can refuse me your breast." Beautiful Maria, doomsday has come. It is bringing the 1,000-year-old dead to life. Know that I have flooded them out of their niches, and that the dead are floating along beside you. Do not look round, Maria. Do not look round, for 2 skeletons are quarrelling about the skull which floats between them, swirling around and grinning, and a third, to whom the skull really belongs, is rearing up with me and falling upon them both. Beautiful Maria, how sweet are your hips! Is the man whom you love never to find that out? Beautiful Maria, listen to what I say to you. Only a little to one side of this way, a flight of stairs leads steeply upwards, leading to freedom. Your knees are trembling. How sweet that is! Do you think to overcome your weakness by clasping your hands? You call upon God, but believe me, God does not hear you. Since I came upon the earth as the great flood to destroy all in existence but Noah's Ark, God has been deaf to the scream of his creatures. Or did you think I had forgotten how the mothers screamed then? Have you more responsibility on your conscience than God on his? Turn back, beautiful Maria. Turn back. Now you are making me angry, Maria. Now I shall kill you. Why are you letting those hot, salty drops fall down into me? I am clasping around your breast, but it no longer stirs me. I want your throat and your gasping mouth. I want your hair and your weeping eyes. Do you believe you have escaped me? No, beautiful Maria. No, now I shall fetch you with 1,000 others, with all the 1,000 which you wanted to save. She dragged her dripping body from the water. She crawled upwards over stone slabs. She found the door. She pushed it open and slammed it behind her, peering to see if the water were already lapping over the threshold. Not yet. Not yet, but how much longer? She could not see a soul as far as her eye could reach. The streets, the squares, lay as if dead, bathed in the whiteness of the moonlight. But she was mistaken. Or was the light growing weaker and yellower from second to second? An impact which threw her against the nearest wall ran through the earth. The iron door through which she had come flew from its bolts and gaped open. Black and silent, the water slipped over the threshold. Maria collected herself. She screamed with her whole lungs, "The water's coming in!" She ran across the square. She called for the guard, which, being on constant duty, had to give the alarm signal in danger of any kind. The guard was not there. A wild upheaval of the earth dragged the girl's feet from under her body and hurled her to the ground. She raised herself to her knees and stretched up her hands in order herself to set the siren howling, but the sound which broke from the metal throat was only a whimper, like the whimpering of a dog, and the light grew more and more pale and yellow. Like a dark crawling beast in no hurry, the water wound its way across the smooth street. But the water did not stand alone in the street. Suddenly, in the midst of a puzzling and very frightening solitude, a little half-naked child was standing there. Her eyes, which were still being protected by some dream from the all-too-real, were staring at the beast, at the dark, crawling beast which was licking at its bare little feet. With a scream in which distress and deliverance were equally mingled, Maria flew to the child and picked it up in her arms. "Is there nobody here but you, child?" she asked, with a sudden sob. "Where is your father?" "Gone." "Where is your mother?" "Gone." Maria could understand nothing. Since her flight from Rotvang's house, she had been hurled from horror to horror without grasping a single thing. She still looked at the grating of the earth, the jerking impacts, the roar of the awful tearing thunder, the water which gushed up from the shattered depths to be the effects of the unchained elements. Yet she could not believe that there existed mothers who would not throw themselves as a barrier before their children when the earth opened her womb to bring forth horror into the world. Only the water which crawled up nearer and nearer, the impacts which racked the earth, the light which became paler and paler gave her no time to think. With the child in her arms, she ran from house to house, calling to the others which had hidden themselves. Then they came, stumbling and crying, coming in troops, ghastly spectres, like children of stone, passionlessly begotten and grudgingly born. They were like little corpses in mean little shrouds, aroused to wakefulness on doomsday by the voice of the angel, rising from out-rent open graves. They clustered themselves around Maria, screaming because the water, the cool water, was licking at their feet. Maria shouted, hardly able to shout any more. There was in her voice the sharp cry of the mother bird which sees winged death above its brood. She waded about among the child bodies, 10 at her hands, at the dress, the others following closely, pushed along, torn along with the stream. Soon the street was a wave of children's heads, above which the pale, rised-up hands flitted like seagulls, and Maria's cry was drowned by the wailing of the children and by the laughter of the pursuing water. The light in the neon lamps became reddish, flickering rhythmically and throwing ghostly shadows. The street sloped. There was a mustering ground, but the huge elevators hung dead on their cables. Ropes twisted from ropes, metal ropes, thick as a man's thigh, hung in the air, torn asunder. Blackish oil was welling in a leisurely channel from an exploded pipe, and over everything lay a dry vapour as if from heated iron and glowing stones. Deep in the darkness of distant alleys, the gloom took on a brownish hue. A fire was smouldering there. "Go up," whispered Maria's dry lips. But she was not able to say the words. Winding stairs led upwards. The staircase was narrow. Nobody used the staircase which ran by the certain infallible elevators. Maria crowded the children up the steps, but up there reigned a darkness of impenetrable gloom and density. None of the children ventured to ascend alone. Maria scrambled up. She counted the steps. Like the rushing of 1,000 wings came the sound of the children's feet behind her, in the narrow spiral. She did not know how long she had been climbing up. Innumerable hands were clutching her damp dress. She dragged her burdens upwards, praying, moaning the while, praying only for strength for another hour. "Don't cry, little brothers," she stammered. "My little sisters, please don't cry." Children were screaming down in the depths, and the 100 winding of the stairways gave echoes triumph to each cry. "Mother! Mother!" And once more, "The water's coming!" Stop and lie down halfway up the stairs? No. Little sisters, little brothers, do come along. Higher, winding ever and always higher upwards, then at last a wide landing, greyish light from above. A walled-in room, not yet the upper world, but its forecourt. A short, straight flight of stairs upon which lay a shaft of light. The opening, a trap door, which seemed to be pressed inwards. Between the door and the square of the wall, a cleft as narrow as a cat's body. Maria saw that. She did not know what it meant. She had the uncertain feeling of something not being as it ought to be, but she did not want to think about it. With an almost violent movement, she tore her hands, her gown, free from the children's tugging fingers, and dashed, hurled forward, far more by her desperate will than by her benumbed feet, through the empty room and up the steep stairway. She stretched out her hands and tried to raise the pressed-in door. It did not budge. Once more, no result. Head, arms, shoulders pushing, hips and knees pressing as if to burst their sinews. No result. The door did not yield by a hair's breadth. If a child had tried to push the cathedral from its place, it could not have acted more foolishly nor ineffectively. For upon the door, which alone led the way out of the depths, were towered as high as houses the corpses of the dead engines, which, when madness first broke out over Metropolis, had been the terrible playthings of the mob. Train upon train, with carriages thundering along, all lights burning and on full power, had rushed along the rails, lashed by the bawling of the mobs, had fallen upon each other, had become mixed and piled up together, had burnt down and were now lying half-melted, still smouldering, a mass of ruins. And one single lamp remained undamaged, through the shaft of its sharp corrosive light over the chaos, from the steel breast of the hindmost engine. But Maria knew nothing of all this. She did not need to know. Sufficient for her that the door, which was the only means of deliverance for her and the children she wanted to save, remained inexorable, immovable, and finally, with bleeding hands and shoulders, with battered head and feet crippled with numbness, she was obliged to resign herself to the incomprehensible, to the murderous. She raised her face to the ray of light which fell upon her. The words of a little childish prayer, now no longer intelligible, ran through her head. She dropped her head and sat down on the stairs. The children stood in silence, crowded closely together under the curse of something which, though they could not understand, was still very close above them. "Little brothers, little sisters," said Maria's voice very affectionately. "Can you all understand what I'm saying?" "Yes," floated up from the children. "The door is closed. We must wait a little. Someone is sure to come and open it up for us. Will you be patient and not be frightened?" "Yes," came the answer as a sigh. "Sit down as well as you can." The children obeyed. "I am going to tell you a story," said Maria. End of part 13. If you are enjoying these audiobooks, please take the time to subscribe, press like, leave a comment, or share this channel with your friends who also enjoy listening to audiobooks. This would help this channel immensely. Thanks.